Good morning, everyone. And welcome to our Sunday service, which is also our Pet Memorial and Nirvana Day service. First off, I would like to thank all of you for your well wishes, and it is wonderful to be back. For those of you who didn't know, last weekend I had a very unwelcome visitor, and that visitor's name is Corona. And believe it or not, this was my first time tangling with this virus. I tested negative now for the past 3 consistent days, so I'm negative. But for safety's sake, I'm going to keep the mask on, if that's all right with you, at least for this weekend. Today, we are, for the Dharma School Dharma Talk, we're going to talk about our pets once again. Our pets are some of our greatest teachers. And I know that these images that you're going to see in the next few slides are going to be very cute ones. But they teach us the many truths that Buddhism talks about all of the time. Our pets are our teachers because they teach us mindfulness, right? We have to be mindful of how our pets are feeling. They teach us responsibility. I know that everyone loves seeing cute pets and cute animals on the television and on the screen, and we all want them, right? But we can't just own a pet and not take responsibility for them. We have to feed the pet. Especially if you have a dog, you have to walk the dog. And even for us cat owners out there, right? We can't just let our cats be necessarily. We have to play with them too. We have to show them attention. We have to do a lot of things for our pets. They teach us about interdependence, right? The message of interdependence, that the choices that we make, have an effect on our pets as well. If you own a pet, or if you are a pet parent, when we go on vacation, we have to make sure that someone is there to, care for them and feed them and make sure that they're taken care of. Or if you're a crazy cat parent like I am, you take your cat with you on vacation, and you make sure you find those pet-friendly hotels. However, they also teach us about the great truths that the Buddha talks about as well. Birth, right? All of our pets are very cute when they're born. We love seeing puppies and kittens, but they're also a very big responsibility. Old age, it is inevitable that as we have our pet companions with us, they have a shorter lifespan than we do, and they will age much quicker than we do. Sickness, all of our pets will get sick from time to time. And this is the part, I think, that leads us to the biggest responsibility, making sure that our pets have the right care. And sadly, the last and final lesson, death. Our pets will eventually have to leave us, and when they do, the pain can be very unbearable. And they are also very good teachers of that, of actually one of the gathas that we're going to sing today, called the Golden Chain. We recite it from time to time here at the temple. But, we make this pledge when we recite the Golden Chain that we will be kind and gentle to every living thing and protect all who are weaker than ourselves. When we make this pledge, right, it's also in regards to not just people, but animals as well. And especially if you have a pet, this is an important lesson to take away from that. Having a pet family member is not always pretty, right? We see all these beautiful images of pets running around outside, those commercials with, the best types of cat food or dog food that you can get. But sometimes owning a pet can be challenging. Pets can be kind of naughty at times. For those of you who have cats or dogs, you know this. Because, if you want to have a cat, you have to be willing to part with your furniture, right? If you don't want your furniture or your curtains or anything, or your bed scratched up, don't get a cat. Because the most inhumane thing you could do for a cat is declaw them, right? So, if you're going to have a kitty, you're gonna, have to, cope with the fact that your furniture is going to get damaged. Same thing with the dog. You know, when the dogs are young, they're full of energy and they want to tear things up. This is part of what dogs do. And yes, you can train them to a degree, but you know, you can't totally get rid of nature. But also, there are the times that you have to care for them when they are sick. Giving pets medication can be very hard sometimes. You know, when I had kitties with my parents, you know, there were times that we had to give our cat Kobe injections, right? And you have, sometimes it can be a two-person job. One person has to hold the cat down, and the other person has to put the medication in. And, you know, that can be very difficult at times. So owning a pet, right, is not all just fun and games and having to get into cuddle a cute fluffy bean. You know, it's also very important for us to learn how to take care of them. Yet pets themselves are also very aware of how we feel. As we go through life, and we have our own difficulties here and there, our pets can also be very good sounding boards for how we feel. Right? You know, sometimes your cat or your dog, you know, knows when you're in a bad mood or when you had a bad day. And pets, unlike people, I think, have an uncanny ability to come and comfort us and give us the unconditional love that we all desire and require. They come and they, you know, comfort us during our times of hardship. And to me, this is how they are one of the most wonderful Buddha teachers, right? They come there just to comfort you and just to be with you, not to give you unsolicited advice, not to, show that they're smarter than you are by giving you strong mental, physical exercises, right? They are there to comfort you and just be with you. But finally, when a pet leaves us, we are heartbroken. Who knew that losing a pet is just as painful as losing a family member? But this is because our pets are our family members. And it doesn't get easier the older we get. When I lost my first cat, Neko, when I was only about, I'd say, 5 or 6 years old, I was heartbroken. And I found that as I get older, the pain when you lose a pet doesn't get easier. This is because we have developed a strong attachment and loving bond with that pet. Buddhism can teach us about our pets and our relationships with them. We still have a strong sense of attachment to the beings we love. And there are also many stories with Buddha himself and animals. In fact, one of the pictures that you see here at the top is that of the Buddha passing into Nirvana when the Buddha finally passed away. One of the legends surrounding this tale, when the Buddha finally passed away, is that not just monks, nuns, and lay people, and even the gods, deities like bodhisattvas and devas, were all present during the Buddha's passing. But animals were too. Somehow, animals knew that, that the Buddha was experiencing, there was this monumental occasion that happened when the Buddha was passing away. And so the animals gathered around and also lamented the Buddha's passing. The other story that you see below here is the story of Prince Siddhartha and the swan. This was before the Buddha became the Buddha, when he was still Prince Siddhartha. How many of you have heard about this story before, the Prince Siddhartha and the swan? So, just a little recap. This is the story of Siddhartha's compassion, his natural compassion, and an indicator that he would become the Buddha. One day, Siddhartha found a swan who was injured by an arrow. A hunter had shot the arrow and hurt the swan. And the one who's actually sitting with the arrow is Siddhartha, because he gently picked up the swan and pulled the arrow out in the most gentle way possible to heal the swan. But the person who was coming over was his mean and not very nice cousin, Devadatta. Devadatta is kind of considered the bad guy in a lot of the Buddhist stories. But he's coming over because he says, hey, I shot that swan out of the sky. That swan belongs to me. And the Buddha said, no, you can only make claim to the swan if the swan died, right? But the swan is still alive. So it is our job and our duty to heal the swan and bring it back to perfect health. So they squabbled and they, argued about this. So they finally took it to an impartial judge. And the judge ruled in favor of Siddhartha, saying that no, Siddhartha is correct. We must, Siddhartha lays claim to the swan, and the compassion won out in the end. And that is the moral of that story. Now, it's often a misunderstanding that Buddhism, that attachment is a bad thing, right? Or that, the type of, when we say, we see this quote here coming from real Buddha quotes, and then again, I also say, I'm not sure exactly if all of these quotes are real Buddha quotes, but that's where this comes from. But the root of suffering is attachment, right? That's one of the things that the people claim that the Buddha is to have said. However, there is a bit of a misconception in this, right? Not all attachments or not all ideas of connection are bad things, right? And well, what do we mean by this? The type of love one feels towards their pet is not a bad form of attachment, right? If you genuinely love and care for your pet, you treat your pet like they are a family member, you talk to your pet, right? That's a wonderful form of attachment because it shows you truly care for this pet and you love them. Possessiveness, neglect, not seeing your pet as a sentient being with feelings, or a sentient being with feelings are all harmful forms of attachment. So if you only see your pet as like another version of a stuffed animal, you don't take responsibility, you think of your pet as just this possession, that is the negative form of attachment that we're talking about. But nurturing, showing love and care and kindness are all wonderful forms of attachment. So when our pets cross the rainbow bridge, it is okay to cry. Sadness is a genuine emotion and should not be suppressed. Right? When you lose a loved one, by all means, show that you love them. And once again, to reiterate a point that I've made in previous Dharma talks, one of the wisest and best books I ever read as a child, and that my mother read to me, was When a Pet Dies by Fred Rogers. All of you probably remember Mr. Rogers, correct? And I'm certain his program still runs from time to time. But one of the things that Mr. Rogers does in this book is he takes the reader through all of the emotional roller coasters that we go through when we lose a pet. From the point when the pet is very sick, to when the pet has passed on, and when the pet, or maybe like a year or so after the pet has died, and we might be thinking about getting another cat or another dog. He tells us that we should all be able to process these emotions and be able to process this form of attachment in a very healthy way, right? Not to suppress these feelings of grief and sadness and even anger sometimes, but to fully acknowledge them and to give them space. This is a healthy form of Buddhism, in my personal opinion. Not just, flicking things off and saying, yes, everything dies, that's reality, right? But fully acknowledging the hurt that we go through when a pet leaves us. Our pets are wonderful teachers and treasures to be cherished forever, even if they are no longer with us in life. A pet's influence can have a great effect on us. Our pets teach us how to communicate, they teach us how to care, they teach us responsibility, and they teach us interdependence. Our pets are some of our greatest Buddha teachers ever to walk this earth. And so let us all try our best, once and for all, to care for pets and love people too, the way that we have shown our pets. I thank you all very much for attending today's Pet Memorial Nirvana Day service. In closing, will you please join me in Gasho? And repeat the Nembutsu with me. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandats, namandats, namandats. Will you all please join me in Gasho as I recite the words from the larger sutra of the Buddha of immeasurable light and immeasurable life. In the future, all sutras will become extinct. However, out of compassion and pity, I will ensure that this sutra alone remains for a further 100 years. Those sentient beings who encounter the sutra will attain emancipation in accordance with their aspiration. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandats, namandats, namandats. Good morning again, everyone. And also, Happy Lunar New Year. Does everyone know which Chinese zodiac animal is this year? The dragon. Very good. I love this year. I love the dragon. Just a little background, or just to, fun fact, my birthday is February 5th, 1989. Now, if we go by the Gregorian calendar, I'm a snake. But if we go by the Chinese lunar calendar, I was born on the last day of the dragon year in that time frame. So I'm kind of this weird, like in-between animal, I guess you could say. But the year of the dragon is wonderful. And I actually like the dragon because the dragon has a lot of symbolism in Buddhism as well. We actually even have dragons here on our hondo, like at the incense burner right here. You'll notice that this particular kodo, they have two dragons, correct? And one of them has an open mouth, and one of them has a closed mouth, representing the beginning of life and the end, right? The opening and the close. So dragons have a very strong meaning in Buddhism. And even like serpents, like water serpents, like nagas, like Nagarjuna, the name of our first of the seven masters, is actually known as snake tamer or water serpent tamer. And then finally, in Gagaku, the classical court instrument, right? I play the ryuteki. The ryu, the Chinese character that we use, is that of dragon. And actually, the name of our head temple in Japan, Nishi Honganji, the official name for that temple is Ryukokuzan, which is Dragon Temple, right? Dragon Temple, basically. Dragon Valley Temple. So, interesting facts about the dragon. However, we are here today to talk about Nirvana Day, or the day that the Buddha passed into Nirvana. Now, when I was thinking about this sermon, I was wondering to myself, this is sort of similar to when a famous person passes away, right? When famous people pass away, what happens? Like now these days, when you're on social media of any kind, or even like the fact that news comes to you, you get the news almost instantly, right? Like, so-and-so passed away, right? And it's usually a very famous person. And then this particular image that you see here, the in memoriam, is the type of font and screen that is used during the Oscars, right? So what's wonderful about the Oscars, I think, one of my favorite times that when I watch the Oscars, is when they do the in memoriam and they show all of the really famous people who passed away that year. And then if they're really big, like Betty White and everything, they show a little clip of one of their movies that you remember them by. So to go off on that note, one of the most famous people who passed away recently, who really has had an effect on my life recently, and I'll get into that in just a second, is Carl Weathers. Those of you are probably familiar with this actor. He starred with both of the very strong, muscly men of the movies, both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. And, and of course, he was even more recently in The Mandalorian, the new Star Wars show. And he still, in his old age, had an amazing presence on the screen. It was really wonderful. And now, how did Carl Weathers have an effect on my life? Well, remember back earlier this year when I told you that my New Year's resolution was I gotta lose a little bit of weight and everything? For those of you who are interested, I have been keeping true to my resolution. Before I got COVID, actually, I was exercising 2 times a day. I would go to Aikido in the morning for their morning classes, and then in the late afternoon, early evening, I actually bought a workout bench and weights. So I'm actually pushing free weights now, basically, and doing those types of exercises. During that time of the exercise, of the afternoon exercise, I was watching all of the Rocky training sequences, to get me pumped up and to get me working out really hard. But my favorite of all of the Rocky sequences comes from Rocky 3. Okay, how many of you have seen all the Rocky movies? Okay, or at least 1 to 3 or 1 to 3, right? So he has a famous rivalry, Apollo Creed. So Rocky has a famous rival named Apollo Creed, who is played by Carl Weathers. And one of the most touching and inspirational movies in the Rocky series is Rocky 3. And this is because Rocky comes against an opponent who is far stronger than he is, and more young and faster. And he defeated Apollo Creed in the second Rocky movie. Now, Apollo Creed could have, easily just brushed things off and, dismissed it all. But he actually went and helped to train Rocky in Rocky 3. So that most inspiring part for me was how an old rival actually took up the responsibility of helping his old rival defeat the new opponent. So, in that regard, Carl Weathers has inspired me to, really, work on myself, keep on training hard, even though I'm recovering from COVID, or I recovered from COVID. I tested negative for 3 consecutive days, just FYI. And I've just been staying true to it. And just as an update, between November of last year and this time right now, I have lost a total of 13 pounds. So, thank you. And I only want to exercise and really continue to improve myself. But when a famous person passes away, we have to think to ourselves all of the inspirational things that they've done for us, that they've showed us, that they've shared with us. And this is also a time where we commemorate the passing of the Buddha, and thank goodness we do it every single year. Oops. So Nirvana Day, in Japanese, Nehane, is the day that the Buddha passed into parinirvana, which, for those of you who don't know, is the highest form of nirvana, the highest form. And this is because he became enlightened beyond his physical body. Okay? And it was in this time as well that the Buddha gave his final teaching to his disciples. The final teaching of the Buddha was basically, in a nutshell, rely on the teaching and the words, not the physical form. Our time on this life is finite and can end in a moment's notice. The Buddha told his disciples, continue to carry on the teachings, right, after I am gone, because he knew that he would not be in this world forever to continue teaching and giving the doctrine. But one of the biggest truths were that the Buddha's human body would not last forever, but the teaching still can. Okay, well, it's true. Nothing lasts forever per se. And yet here we are, 2,500 years after the Buddha's existence, and we are still sharing the teachings of the Buddha. But for us as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, one of the most important messages that the Buddha left for us was Amida's wisdom and compassion, and it still reaches us even to this very moment. And we still continue to teach this story and recite the you notice even in the larger sutra, right, the larger sutra of the Buddha of infinite light and life, there is a sense of finality, knowing that there will come a time when the Dharma will leave us, right, when the Dharma will be extinguished. There will come a time when the sutras will no longer exist. And yet, the Buddha makes the point that because this particular teaching of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion is so important, that he will ensure that it stays with us for an extra 100 years. Now, one could look at that in two ways, of course. It was so important that it's, one can look at it in two ways. This book, by the way, is available for purchase from the BCA bookstore website. One could argue that the Buddha was talking about that after he passes away, right? After I pass away, or after the time of my physical being here on this world, I will ensure that this sutra stays around for 100 years. And in that regard, we've surpassed the goal. It's been over 2,000 years since the Buddha's passing, and the teaching of Namo Amida Butsu, wisdom, endless wisdom and compassion, is still here with us. In fact, we are still here gathering at this temple, placing our hands together and saying Namo Amida Butsu. In this regard, I think we have surpassed the expectations. Or you could also look at it in a more longer sense, right? After Mappo has finished, after the Dharma has completely been extinguished, which will not be in our lifetimes for sure, but even further down the road, this teaching is still so important that it will stay with us for over those 100 years. So while we still have a long ways to go, it is still wonderful to see that this teaching is still staying with us even to this time and as far away from the time of the Buddha as we are now. But, again, right, the teaching or just, the book itself, right, wouldn't be significant without the meaning inside the book. Once again, it provided us a teaching for all of us beings to achieve enlightenment. And we are Bonbu, or as we say in English, ordinary beings. We used to say like foolish beings, but I like to say ordinary beings, beings who are not enlightened. Yet there is still a path for enlightenment for us. For all of us who live in the modern world now, it is very, very hard, if not darn near impossible, for us to achieve enlightenment by our own means. And yet the Buddha was prepared for this and realized that there would come a time, after his time, that we would need extra assistance. And this is the teaching of Amida Buddha. This is the teaching of infinite light and infinite life. For all of us here at Tacoma Buddhist Temple, the fact that we hold services ensures that the teaching will continue beyond us as well. And this actually ties into our usual Eitaikyo service that we do every November. We look at the names on the list in the back, and I'm not sure if any of those folks on the names of the list in the back are still with us. Maybe some of them could be, but I think the vast majority of them are no longer here with us. And yet they did all that they could to ensure that this space and that this teaching still will continue to this day. And I think that says something about the Buddha's teaching and how it still affects all of us, even 2,000 years after he passed. So in this regard, I think it's very important for us to take stock in the Buddha's words, in the Buddha's existence, and the fact that he also educated us about the finite of our lives. The idea that we are not going to be here forever. And as invincible as I may feel, and as much weight as I think I'll lose, and as much as Carl Weathers inspires me, right, I too will also be subject to the ultimate truths of life, right? Birth, which has already happened, old age, which I already feel like, but then people tell me, oh, you're still young, sensei. Then there's sickness, which happened to me for sure. And then eventually death. All of us share these truths with each other. And the Buddha was able to show us this ultimate truth even with his own body. So in this regard, I think it's very important for us to continue to listen deeply to the Buddha's words of infinite life and infinite life of the Buddha of wisdom and compassion. So I would like to thank you all for attending today's Nirvana Day service. In closing, will you please join me in Gasho while I once again read the words of Shakyamuni Buddha. In the future, all sutras will become extinct. However, out of compassion and pity, I will ensure that this sutra alone remains for a further 100 years. Those sentient beings who encounter this sutra will attain emancipation in accordance with their aspiration. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Namanda Namanda.